Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today I'm here with a VR to Anna at Astral Lady Tarot, specifically responding to her hashtag decks I'm using now and why. So in Anna's original video, she spoke about 3 decks she's currently using in her practice, what they signify for her, why she thinks she's using them, her connection to them, and what she thinks that means in terms of herself and her inner self, as well as her outer sphere. So she's posed a few questions, and I really enjoyed the way she worked through the decks and explaining what they mean to her and how they speak to who she is, especially at this current time. So I wanted to make a response and answer these questions as well and reflect in the same way. So the questions she's posed that I hope I'm going to loosely answer as I speak about the decks are: what attracts me in the decks I've picked? What am I looking for right now? What do I need? Can I relate the deck's energy or theme to what is happening around me? Can I relate the deck's energy or theme to what is happening in my personal life or inside of me? And what do I expect this deck will bring me? So we're gonna pick away at those questions as I speak about the decks, and without further ado, I'll get into the 3 I've chosen, and then following that, there is a sort of spread to check in with oneself in terms of the decks, and I think that'll be really fun. So we'll head over to my tarot table for that, but first we're gonna speak about why these decks are the ones that I'm using. So first, and I think this will be no surprise to anybody who's seen any of my videos, is the Thoth Tarot, specifically this version, which is a vintage greenie, and it is one that I purchased, and it has a lot of, not damage, but it's water damage. There are a lot of defects going on here, and at first I was disappointed with this purchase and felt a little bit like I was tricked, but I've grown to love it, and I decided to keep it, and it's actually been a little bit of a journey in terms of my reflections upon what feels like unhealthy striving for perfection. So enjoying the little flaws and things in life and seeing them to enhance rather than detract from the value of any given thing. So I've enjoyed the journey that this has taken me on, and now I find that the water damage and the defects and the blemishes all add to the character of the deck, and so it feels very personal in a way now, and I guess that's why this specific edition, the specific actual deck, is the one that I feel called to work with right now. So beyond that surface and what that means for me, the Thoth deck in general is one that I've worked with for quite some time, so I guess there is an element of comfort here, and that's partially why I've picked it. It's the deck I use for myself and clients most, and I feel like I know it and it knows me. I also feel like it's one of the most balanced decks I've ever worked with and seen. I feel like there are a lot of leanings, especially in present day, leanings towards positivity to the detriment of any negativity or darkness within a deck. So the harsh images are taken out, the harsh messages are taken out, and instead we get affirmations and pretty pictures. And I don't find those to be very helpful. That's just my personal preference. And while I do think that decks that are more affirmative, decks that are more upbeat and optimistic, they have their place in time, and I do love them for myself as well, I find that as a reader who really wants to get answers, who wants to reflect, who wants to make decisions and take action based on my readings, that these cards and their balance are important. They're actually pivotal and vital to my practice, so I enjoy it for that. I enjoy the abstract artwork. I love that when I look at this, I don't see the world around me, and I think if I did, I would feel limited. I would feel like I'm looking for very practical answers within the cards, and I don't think that's useful. So when I see images and figures and beings that don't resemble human beings, the proportions and the colors and the way that they are painted or depicted is not very human-like. You can see a rough sort of figure, but at the same time, this does not look like somebody I would see walking down the street. And I think that adds to this sort of formless nature of the deck, this formless nature that I find to be highly beneficial in that I can mold the forms. I can attribute anybody to this card because it doesn't look like anybody I know, and I like that. You can see the Empress, very formless. You see the profile of her face. She's almost genderless in a way too. I mean, there is a sort of femininity within this card, or a yin energy, but it's not necessarily a gendered card in this deck, I find. And also we get the minors, I think, that lend themselves to, again, I don't like that sort of scenic energy. I like to have to dig and to reflect and to project myself in order to flesh out the answers. I also enjoy the fact that there's so much attention to detail and correspondence within this deck, the astrology and the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, everything that Aleister Crowley sort of imbued within this deck. It feels like a sacred text. It feels like a tome of sigils. So I can use it in magic. I can use it in meditation. I can use it for reflection. I can pull the cards consciously and create a scene. I can use it in a more divinatory or forecasting way. I can use it to reflect on dynamics and relationships in my life. And the colors and the energies are so vibrant and effusive and communicative that there really is there's no lack of language here. It's always communicating, it's always speaking. There's always something being said by these cards, and I love it for that. And I feel like I can just get lost in this deck. I feel like each one is a print or a painting that I'd want to hang on my wall. I feel like if I only had one deck, it would be this deck, and I would be content. And I love the idea that I could be an eternal student with this deck, so I love working with it because I can open up a bunch of really well-researched texts and literature, and I can cross-reference cards. I can learn about the angles, I can learn about the astrology, I can learn about mythology that is tied in and what that all means. I can learn about color correspondence. There's an endless amount to be found within this deck, and I love being able to just go and open up book upon book upon book and get lost in the words and the literature. And I think that that's something that's very important to me in all aspects of life. I don't like when there's a simplicity that doesn't allow for exploration. I want depth. I want something that allows me to keep digging. I don't want there to ever be a bottom or an end. And this deck provides that. And so I love it for that. And I feel like it reflects me very accurately. And I feel like it doesn't pull any punches, as I spoke to that sort of balanced aspect. Now, as far as how this reflects the outer world around me, I feel like the nebulous and formless shapes within this deck are actually very appropriate given the sort of nebulous times we're existing within. There's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of change and flux and shift, and I feel like this deck almost feels like paint that hasn't dried. It feels like clay that hasn't hardened or been hasn't been fired within a kiln. It feels like something that has work put into it. It feels like raw material that needs to be worked with. It's very malleable in that way. And I feel like the world is very much in a malleable state where we are working with raw material to get what we want. And it just feels very appropriate for that. And so the Thoth is going to be my number one. And I think it's going to always be my number one. So that's that. Next, second up, we have, these are the backs. This is the Masonic Tarot. And I believe all of the titles are in French as well. I believe it's in French, the Le Tarot de Masonique, something like that. So this is a pip deck, and actually that's why I love it. So I think I may have mentioned this in my favorite pip decks video. I could be wrong. But something about the pips really gets me. So I'll try to find a few within the same suit. But every pip card has a different border. The way that the suit, the number of the suit is arranged is different in every single pip card. So while in Marseille, yes, there is a structure to the way that the items are arranged in any given card, and it's very regimented and there is a sort of system to that, this doesn't really seem to have much of that going on, and I love it for that. So I can look to say this swooping here, I can look to the very differences in all the cups, I can look to this triangle, I can look to this corner, and it's going to be completely different in another cup card, as well as how the cups are arranged. We also have the majors, which feel intensely, they feel just so, how do I put it? well, of course, this is based on Freemasonry, so there's a lot of attention to color, to line, to angle and shape, and I feel like this, if it were to be a person, this would be a strategist, it would be an organizer, it would be somebody who was very structured, so they would offer detailed plans, they'd be very practical, very serious in a way, and I feel like I look to this deck for structure, for answers that are very practical. So I'll line them up in a similar way that I know many read Marseille, which is in lines. So I find that this deck lends itself well to that. And I'll read it in such a way, but also there's this sort of structure that it offers me, but at the same time, there's something deeper to it. So while it's serious, it's also like that type of serious person that you get to know, and then you come to find they're actually quite fun. There's a little bit of a wild side there. They're creative. There's something to them. There's more beyond that sort of facade that they exude. So I find that this is almost like the case with this deck. It feels a bit like a house of mirrors. It feels like it knows me and reflects me back at me, but it also knows my secrets. It knows more than my surface. So while it looks like me and in the way that it reads, I find it almost feels like my voice, it also knows what I'm about to do. So it can head me off at the pass before I start to make decisions and before I start to intuit certain things that might be incorrect or very ego-based. It will say like, no, let's dig a little bit deeper here. I know what you're thinking. And I feel like it's speaking to me in that way. And it does feel like a fun house of mirrors. There are distorted images. I'm seeing things in a different way. So I can see myself, but in some ways I see myself differently. I can see myself from every angle, and I really appreciate it in that way. And I do turn to it, I think, oftentimes for decision making, for strategizing in terms of what I might want and goal setting. So this is really helpful, I think, for me, especially at this point in my life where I am making a lot of changes. I am setting goals. I am needing to reflect upon my decisions and how they're going to sculpt and shape me as I go forward. And so I am very cognizant of all of my thoughts, my emotions, my actions. And this deck allows me to check in and be very realistic about what those are doing, how they are affecting me, and where one decision might take me. So it's very helpful in that way. As far as this being a little bit of a reflection of the outside world, it does feel like this deck speaks to what a lot of us, I think, are in the midst of doing, which is making changes, being cognizant of our actions and trying to plan for a future, not knowing where the future is going. We feel like there is a lot of unrest in the world and that we are disrupted in many of our ways. And I think that this deck is helpful for that. I also love in the cup suit how there's these random red and green hands that sometimes make appearances. That's just so interesting to me. The use of color is amazing here. This deck is just wonderful and beautiful. And I don't know much about Freemasonry, and I don't feel like I absolutely need to understand what's going on here. It has a lovely short little guidebook. It's mostly in other languages, but there's a short bit that's in English, and it's really profound and deep and meaningful in what it has to say, especially about the majors. So I enjoy that as well. Look at how amazing that is. I love the angles and the lines, and I know that Freemasonry is really about, not really about, but from what I can pick up as an outsider, it feels like seeing the divine in the mundane. So it's all about structures and the idea of masonry in terms of creating and shaping and architecture, and then finding something spiritual within the creation of something so physical. And that's what I see in this deck, and that's why I value it, because I think I like to view the world in a similar way. I like to find the spiritual and the higher within what is around me. And so this deck provides me with that, and that's why I think I like to use it and why it's so important to me right now. So the third and final deck I picked is the Tarot of the Spirit. Now for the third deck, there was a little bit of a tie going on. I was tempted to pick, I believe it is the Starlight Dragon Tarot, as well as the Spirit Keeper's Tarot. But I ended up going with the Tarot of the Spirit because it offers a bit more of a challenge. So I worked with this deck in August and read the guidebook, and I mentioned that I didn't use the deck nearly as much as I thought I would, given that I had set out to work with it. I felt more drawn and compelled to read the book, actually, and I was more engrossed in the readings and the content and the literature than I was with the deck itself. And I think that's because what this deck symbolizes for me is somewhat out of reach, and that I need to do the work before it's going to sort of click into place and unlock the secrets, and before it starts to feel very natural. So this deck to me is highly spiritual. It's abstract, which I love, and it seems to be and speak to a sense of higher self, a sense of true spirituality that is detached from materiality in a way. It's meditative, it's true. It's not that sort of spirituality that's just performative or nice in theory. It's true spirituality, at least in my opinion. And I feel like that's a journey that I'm taking, and that I'm slowly getting to and struggling to get to. I definitely face obstacles in terms of materiality and understanding myself in terms of my higher self, and getting to a place that is more, more authentic, I guess more authentic to myself. And so I'm stripping back the layers, and I feel like that by stripping back the layers of myself, I'm getting closer to this deck, and that at some point it's going to click into place. And so it's frustrating, and it's a little bit of an enigma, and something that a mystery that needs to be solved. And for that reason, it feels very important in my practice right now. And so I do kind of go out of my way and force myself to work with it, because in theory, this is the perfect deck for me. It has so much in terms of correspondence. The artwork is exactly the kind of artwork that I like to work with. We have the Kabbalah, we have astrology, we have all of those correspondences and that literature that I love to dig into. So all of that's present here. And I would just think, in theory, and upon seeing this deck and ordering it and deciding to work with it, I was like, this is going to be a game changer for me. This is going to be a deck that I'm going to love, and it's going to take me to a new level. And then here I am feeling so stuck and frustrated and not so drawn to it. And so for that very reason, I feel like I need to work with it a lot more. And so as far as what I think it reflects inside of myself, it is that yearning towards a true and authentic spirituality, something that is detached from any sort of ego and materiality, something that is formless, that is intrinsic. And in an outer sphere and what the world is going through, I do think that many during these times are turning to spirituality, or reflecting upon their spiritual paradigms and belief systems, and trying to figure out what those are and why. And I think that this is the perfect deck to investigate that. And so I would turn to this for spiritual matters and for inner contemplation, and I would hope that it would almost speak to a detachment in a way, a healthy detachment from the material world that I think I could benefit from. And so for that reason, I really enjoy this deck and feel like it's crucial and vital in my practice right now. So that's why I'm using it. Now, that takes us through the 3 decks that I wanted to speak about, and now we're going to get into the reading portion with these decks. So we're going to head over to my tarot table. I'm going to pull up the positions in the spread, and we're going to get right into that. Hi everyone, so we're over at my tarot table, and we're going to get right into the reading with the spread positions that Anna has laid out to reflect. So we'll start with the Thoth Tarot and lay out the cards for these positions. So the spread positions are, where am I now? What can I take in to feel better and to feel more balanced? And then the third one is, what can I send out to feel better? All right, so with our first one, we've got where am I now? So we have the sun. So I guess we'll dig into this one first. So with the sun card here, where am I at now? I feel like there is a sort of joy and clarity where I'm at now. I do feel like I know I'm more cognizant of who I am and what's going on around me. So through the various trials and tribulations I've faced in recent months, I think that all of us have faced in our own ways, I have become more self-aware. I think I do know myself better. I think every time you have to do something that you didn't think you would ever have to do, or go through something you never thought you would go through, you do become more aware of who you are. And so while The Sun card is a happy card. For me, it's also one that speaks to clarity. And so the dancing here to me is more of an exaltation. It feels like they are worshiping what the sun represents, and the sun is I would say it's a healthy form of the ego. When we look at the Thoth and we look on the tree of life at Tifereth, the sixth Sephirah on the tree of life, we see there's this sort of divinity in a lower sense that is more easily attained in the sun. And so this is where one sort of elevates, is when you reach that sort of that sixth point, that sun. There's a sort of divinity here. And I think that the sun symbolizes for me this awareness. It symbolizes this exaltation of the self through experience. And so I do believe that's kind of where I'm at now. I do think that there's some truth in what this is speaking to. And while it doesn't feel nearly as happy as I think sometimes the sun card can, it does feel very reassuring and validating. Next, we have, what can I take in to feel better and feel more balanced? So this is more about magnetizing and drawing in. It feels a little bit like a manifestation card. So here we have the Prince of Discs. Now, the Prince of Discs here seems to be speaking to work. What can I take in? I think this is asking and calling for me to be, one, more patient. I think that the Prince of Discs is one of the slower moving court cards. He speaks to, I think, steady progress. And I know that I do suffer from, I guess, more impulsive and erratic decision making. So what can I take in? I think slowing down a little bit more, not being so hasty in my decisions, and not jumping to conclusions so quickly. I think that sometimes I miss out on really wonderful opportunities and chances to experience things when I make my decisions and act too quickly. So what I need to bring in, I think, is a little bit of his it feels like a stocky, sturdy stubbornness. So I guess kind of getting my feet into the dirt, so to speak, setting down some roots and allowing myself to experience one place, one time, one decision fully before moving on to anything new. So instead of jumping from one flower to the next or chasing something, I think this is about allowing yourself to be drawn to a thing rather than seeking it out. Everything with the Prince of Discs feels natural and intuitive. He knows what he wants, he knows how to get it, and he knows that it's going to take time. So I guess a little bit more patience, and I think a kindness to the self. He seems very self-deprecating, but also endearing and kind and loving in a self-worth oriented type of way. So finally, for the spread, before we get to the other decks, we have, what can I send out to feel better? So here we've got Victory with the Six of Wands. I think that this is speaking more to my personal energy, so giving of myself and maybe being a bit more selfless, giving recognition where it's due. I think that this might also speak to lifting others up, and I think that rather than chasing my own dreams and seeking out things for myself and my own goals, I think I might benefit from sending out and helping and offering a lending hand to others. So this, in a very literal way, might look like volunteering, but I also think in my sphere of family and friends that becoming more invested in what they're doing and really having this synergistic energy where I offer them a part of myself. And I think that there's some beauty to be had in freely offering up any part of yourself to another that you care about, almost like love through action. And so that's the first thing that I think of here. I also think a little bit of letting one's guard down. This feels a bit like a fence that's been erected. It feels like those flames are on the other side, maybe flames of spirit, flames of the inner self, and they're on the other side, and then these wands are kind of guarding it. So there is this sort of guarded self within here, and I think by maybe dismantling the very pretty cage that this represents, that I will achieve something greater, that I will become closer to those around me. So I think this is about community and connection with others, and I think I could benefit from maybe dropping my guard a little bit more and also reaching out a lending hand for others and offering them some help and being more caring in that way. So that's with the Thoth deck. Now we're going to see what the Masonic Tarot says about the very same things. This deck's a little bit tougher to shuffle. It's very long and narrow, so we'll shuffle it this way. All right, where am I at now? And then the next one is, what can I take in? And then what can I send out? So where am I at now? We have the sun again. Wow. I guess the sun is a really, really big and prevalent theme. We have 2 sun cards right for the same position. That is so wild. All right. Now this sun looks very different actually. So the color tones, we have blues and pinks. So it's very subdued. It feels more deep and meaningful. We actually have a wall here, and it feels like a fence that's going to be walked around. We've got this one person here, and this person appears to have the sun right around their head, and this person's looking to them. Maybe they're taking them with them up to the sun. We see a bird that I think will probably speak to maybe higher self descending. This does feel very much in alignment with what I see the Thoth sun to represent. We have the glyphs for the various elements present. So this one does feel and does seem to speak to the very similar elements of the Thoth. I'm getting the sense here now, though, that this one offers a little bit more of this ascension. So while there is a clarity and there is this sort of acceptance and this higher self and this knowing of the self, I think that there's more to be had. I think that where we're at now is a period of growth, a period of, in a way, an ascension of the spirituality. When I spoke to that tarot of the spirit and needing to sort of get to a point where I could work with it, getting to a more authentic spiritual self, I think that where I'm at now is a period of getting there. I think maybe I haven't reached the point that the sun represents, but I'm in the midst of what this represents. So I'm on my path to get to this point. And I think this point will be a really big chapter, a pivotal point that will change some things for myself. So rather than having already arrived here, I think that I'm on the journey up. So that's always nice to reflect on and to know. I know for Crowley, for example, the sun really spoke to, and achieving the sun was really this idea of reaching a higher spiritual self, of communing with one's own holy guardian angel, I believe is how he puts it. And so that voice and that guardian and that guide that we all get from our higher self. So I think that's really interesting that we happen to get 2 sun cards there. Now, speaking to what it is that I need to take in to feel better and more balanced, we have the 5 of Wands. So this is a big difference actually from the Prince of Discs if we think about it. So while the Prince of Discs up here I think spoke to patience, it spoke to slowing down and not being as impulsive, I think the 5 of Wands, it almost feels oppositional. It feels like it wants there to be a shakeup. So I am curious about why there seems to be such an opposition between these 2 cards. So yeah, I am seeing this really as disparate parts of myself, a settling of strife, of inner strife. And so in a way, I'm almost tempted to see this as the Prince of Discs being on a sort of plow, in a sense, and he's coming along and picking up the sticks and ordering them. In a way, they're facing different directions, the stars kind of askew, and so I almost am seeing this as him finding the materials that he needs and putting them in order so that he can properly use them. So while he is not very erratic and impulsive, and I think he speaks to a need for patience and a need to make very conscious decisions, this is the raw energy he requires. And so I don't just need to take on and embody what the Prince of Discs signifies. I think I also need to bring that energy to the table for him to use. So he's not just lethargic and sitting there. He needs the energy that I have. So it's not to say that I need to suppress myself in any sort of way, but maybe to give structure and make structure, get some order out of the chaos, so to speak. So I'm seeing these 2 as being actually very complementary. While oppositional in their energies, they do feel like they can play together very well if if gone about in the right way. And so I think that they work actually very well. And then next, we are looking at what to send out to feel better. So here we get the 10 of Swords. So before we had the 6 of Wands in the Thoth Tarot, now we have the 10 of Swords. So I think that these are actually speaking to very similar concepts in that how I viewed this as a boundary that needs to be taken down. So there is this sort of giving up. There's a surrender, there's a giving over of, and there's also a selflessness here in that I felt like it needed to be me helping others that I care about and really fostering those relationships. I think that the 10 of Swords here is speaking to a little bit of this self-deprecating aspect. It almost feels like this is the laurel wreath that one might wear on their head that we often find in some 6 of Wands depictions, but yet there are swords through it and they're all facing upward. So I think this is about maybe falling on your own sword a little bit. So this would be taking one for the team, being willing to sacrifice yourself for something that matters. So I think this is at its core getting to, yes, let's take down the boundaries that aren't necessary. Let's have closer, better relationships. Let's be a little bit more selfless. So let's send out that energy to others that we know that they deserve. And I think it's going to yield benefits for myself in terms of growth and fostering relationships that are really meaningful and allowing them to thrive. Because I do think I do have a lot of boundaries up and I do tend to isolate myself. And in that way, I am limiting myself. These both feel like walls, like fences. And the more I can sort of deconstruct those so that I can have a more comprehensive and holistic experience, I think the better I will be. So let's send that sort of energy out. So now we're going to look to the Tarot of the Spirit to answer these questions for us. Now this is going to be interesting, especially as I mentioned, because this isn't a deck that I feel very drawn to. So reading with it is not necessarily the easiest for me at this point. So I'll be curious to see what I think. It's not to say I can't read with it, but it doesn't come to me as naturally as these other two. So over here with where I'm at now, we have the 3 of Fire, Birth of Light. Now, this goes hand in hand with these two. So we have 2 Sun cards from both the Thoth Tarot and the Masonic Tarot, and then we get the 3 of Fire, or 3 of Wands, which is the Birth of Light. So with this one, I see it almost as a coming together. I love how the coloration is very similar actually to the Masonic Tarot. This will focus. We get those blue hues. We also see the pinks. And then we get the white, which is the sun. So these feel very fitting. And the fact that there's 3, and then we have 3 here, it's almost like 3 suns. And they're all really focusing in on one point. So there's a cool toned, which is maybe speaking to one aspect. This also actually feels a bit like a balancing of the masculine and the feminine, the yin and the yang, the anima and animus. So we get this sort of what feels like the very stereotypical masculine force, the very stereotypical feminine force, and then in between we have something that maybe sits above ideas of gender and sits above the forceful and the receptive, or the active and receptive, something that's a little bit higher even than that has balance between the two. And so maybe where I'm at now is a sort of balancing of myself and my energies. So learning when it's right to take action and when to apply that force, but also when to listen and to allow things to come to me and to be receptive to others and emotions and feelings. And I guess that's part of a spiritual journey as well, and what the path to Tiferet and the path to the sun symbolizes is really a sort of balancing and an understanding and a growth of and within the self. And so these to me feel so perfect and poignant and fitting, and especially this coloration right here that matches up almost to a T with the Masonic Tarot. It's almost a little bit eerie in a way that these all came together in such a way. Now moving over to what it is that we need to take in right now for balance, for the sake of balance, we have the Two of Earth, cause and effect. This feels very fitting as well. So while we had the Prince of Discs picking up and ordering these wands, so it was almost like adding fuel and really making order from chaos so that this Prince of Discs can do what he needs to do and to blaze a trail. Then we have this cause and effect, this Two of Earth. So this is literal balance in that there needs to be a sort of order to the way that things are done. They can't just be haphazard. They can't be also too slow. So while he works very slowly and methodically, and the five of Wands is a little bit more erratic and impromptu, I guess somewhere in between the two of them is the Two of Earth, the cause and effect, where there's a give and a take, a pull and a push. There's a time and a place for working slowly and methodically and patiently. And there's another time when we do need to let that wild side out a little bit and be a little bit disruptive for the sake of shaking things up and newness and challenging ourselves. And so the Two of Earth is really, I think, a binding force between the two of these. It feels like it'll draw them together and allow them to work in harmony. I think it's sort of the cog in the machine that's going to allow it to work as efficiently as possible. And so I think that ultimately, in terms of balancing, I really need to learn when the Prince of Discs and what he embodies is called for, and when we do need to bring in the Five of Wands, and that for the most part, there's a happy medium to be found where these can cohabitate, although they seem very different, that they can feed into each other, and that there's a greater sort of energy when we can find out how these two work together. And that takes place right here in the Two of Earth, which is cause and effect. So next and finally, we have what it is that we're sending out. So far, this has felt like a card of release. We have the Six of Wands, and we have the Ten of Swords. There was an element of taking down boundaries, of being selfless, of self-sacrificing and being self-deprecating and opening oneself up. So next we have the Empress. So I think that this works perfectly. It feels like maybe she sits beyond these two. If these were fences, she would be over here. Say this is a garden, and this is the fence in front of the garden that's keeping us out. She sits just behind the fence. And once we learn what the keys to these two gates in the fence, we can get to the Empress and what she has to offer. So I think what we're sending out is abundance, and I think that through sending out abundance, you receive abundance. You receive what the Empress is. So if I can play the role of the mother, of the nurturer, if I can be that person to others, it's going to, in turn, affect me in a positive way. So it's not necessarily about because I give, I'm taking from myself. I think through giving, you're actually giving to yourself. And when you choose to take, you're also taking from yourself. So it's the act of giving that keeps on giving in a way. So what we're sending out ultimately is this sort of, there's this sort of intimacy and closeness through deconstructing boundaries and also through being selfless, but also sending out the help and the energy and the love that the Empress embodies, and being there for others and being there for ourselves. So I think this is really a card of this position in the spread has really been about relationships more so than anything else. So that's very, very interesting. All of these felt like they went together so well in their own way, in a way that almost felt uncanny. So I've really enjoyed doing this spread. And I think it's a very helpful way to look at how I can work with these decks as well and where I'm at. So thank you so much, Anna. Thank you also for everybody watching. Let me know what you thought, and if you try this out, I'd be very, very curious. So like and subscribe if this was interesting. I hope you are all well. Until next time, bye.